And even if he does land his best shot at the moment, not that much is going to happen.
And it almost, oh, there's a left hook. Oh, there it is! Down goes Paul!
6, 7, 8, 9.
For the past few years, the internet has been quietly running a social experiment that most people don't like to acknowledge. An experiment where influence starts to matter more than credentials, where controversy opens doors that used to be locked, and where spectacle slowly replaces tradition. And there is no arena where this shift has been more visible than boxing. Boxing has always been a strange sport. It sits right at the crossroads of ego, controlled violence, and celebrity culture. It's brutal, personal, and deeply tied to public perception. That combination made it the perfect environment for someone like Jake Paul to break through. Jake Paul didn't enter boxing because the sport was begging for a savior. He entered because attention demanded a host. He recognized something early on that hardcore fans despised, but promoters understood very well. In the modern era, boxing doesn't survive on purity or tradition. It survives on eyeballs. Pay-per-view numbers don't measure respect. They measure curiosity. Legacy doesn't make people click. Storylines do. And almost overnight, Jake Paul became one of the most irresistible storylines in combat sports. Not because fans believed in his skill, but because they doubted it. People didn't tune in to cheer for him. They tuned in hoping this would finally be the night he gets humbled, exposed, or embarrassed on a global stage. That tension is what powered his rise. Boxing didn't need Jake Paul, but the attention economy did. And in a sport where attention often matters more than belts, that made all the difference.
Prediction for the fight, Logan?
It'll be a knockout for sure. Obviously, I'm saying a Jake Paul knockout, and I don't see this fight going more than 3 rounds, bro.
At the beginning, it was easy for people to brush it off. YouTubers stepping into the ring, retired MMA fighters chasing a paycheck, former athletes competing years after their prime had passed. Every time, critics repeated the same argument. This isn't real boxing. And on the surface, they weren't entirely wrong. But that argument ignored one uncomfortable detail. Jake kept winning. Not in a way that silenced everyone overnight. Not with flawless performances or unquestionable dominance. But often enough, and convincingly enough, that the tone of the conversation began to change. Slowly, almost reluctantly, people stopped asking, "Is this fake?" and started asking something far more dangerous. How far can this actually go? That question matters because eventually it demands an answer. Jake Paul didn't coast on hype alone. He trained. Seriously. Elite gyms, legitimate coaches, experienced sparring partners who weren't there for content but for work. At some point, pretending stopped being an accusation that stuck. He wasn't playing boxer anymore, he was becoming one. Still raw, still limited, still exposed in certain areas, but undeniably better than before. And with improvement came ambition. Each fight had to be louder than the last. Each opponent had to quiet critics just a bit more. The stakes kept rising because they had to. That's the logic of spectacle. That's how the path eventually led to this moment. The moment Jake Paul agreed to step into the ring with Anthony Joshua. From that instant, the conversation changed entirely. This wasn't a test. This was a reckoning. Anthony Joshua isn't just another recognizable name. He's a former unified heavyweight champion, an Olympic gold medalist, a man who has stood across from some of the most dangerous fighters on earth and survived. He represents everything Jake had been orbiting around without ever fully touching. True elite heavyweight boxing. Even before a punch was thrown, the physical reality told its own story. Joshua isn't just bigger, he's built for destruction. His power isn't flashy or wild, it's clinical, career-altering. The kind of force that ends nights early and rewrites plans permanently. And the moment the fight was announced, even Jake's most devoted supporters understood this wasn't business as usual. This wasn't a what if, this was a how bad. Still, Jake did what he's always done best. He leaned all the way into the moment. The build-up was loud, the trash talk was non-stop. The theatrics were turned up to maximum. Because if Jake Paul has mastered anything, it's shaping the narrative before the first bell ever rings. He wanted this to feel like another event, another spectacle, another viral chapter in influencer boxing history. But Anthony Joshua never played the game. At press conferences, Joshua was calm, focused, almost indifferent, not dismissive out of arrogance, but out of professionalism. He didn't need insults. He didn't need theatrics. He understood exactly what this was. Work. And when the cameras turned off, that mindset mattered far more than anything said online. By the time fight night arrived, the energy felt different. The crowd wasn't laughing. They weren't watching ironically. They were waiting to see if the experiment had finally reached its limit, waiting to find out whether clout could survive contact with real, unforgiving power. And when the bell rang, it became clear almost immediately, this was not going to look like any Jake Paul fight anyone had seen before.
But I think Jake fought a very, how do I survive long enough to land a right hand type of fight? And it made it a little difficult for AJ to get his timing. No excuses. AJ didn't look great. I'll be honest. He didn't look great. He didn't look like, an AJ we thought we were going to get, the Marauder, the guy that was going to come forward and bang out Jake in one round. Pause.
From the opening seconds, the tone was wrong for Jake. He wasn't retreating as part of a plan, he was retreating on instinct. Anthony Joshua took control of the ring almost effortlessly. He cut off space instead of chasing. He applied pressure without rushing. He forced reactions rather than giving openings. Jake wasn't choosing his moments, he was responding to them. Every step backward felt unplanned. Every exchange felt borrowed time. That's when reality started to seep in. As the rounds wore on, it became increasingly clear that Jake Paul wasn't fighting with the intention to win. He was fighting with the need to endure. And that difference matters more than most fans realize. Winning requires decision-making. Survival relies on instinct. Jake's instincts kicked in early, and they weren't the instincts of someone hunting an opening. They were the instincts of someone who had just discovered the gap between preparation in the gym and reality under the lights. Joshua never rushed the process. He didn't force an ending. He didn't chase a highlight. Even though the power disparity was obvious from the first clean connection, he stayed composed. This is what elite heavyweights do when they know time is on their side. They observe, they probe, they touch just enough to assert control without exposing themselves to unnecessary danger. Every jab Joshua landed felt like a warning rather than a threat. Not meant to end the fight, but meant to communicate something far more unsettling. You don't belong here. And Jake felt it. You could see it in his footwork, which grew scattered. You could see it in the wide circles instead of confident steps forward. This wasn't strategy. This was avoidance. And here's the uncomfortable truth that fans don't like to face. Avoidance only works for so long. In boxing, you can't run forever, especially not against someone who understands distance the way Joshua does. The ring shrinks under pressure. It doesn't matter how fast your feet are moving. Space disappears anyway. Jake did land punches. That deserves to be acknowledged. He caught Joshua a few times, clean enough that the crowd reacted, that brief spark of disbelief flashing across the arena. For a moment, people wondered if something unexpected might actually happen, but those moments vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. Joshua absorbed the shots calmly. No panic, no hesitation, no visible effect. That's where the contrast became unavoidable. Fighters at that level don't react the way influencers are used to. Jake, on the other hand, reacted to everything. A blocked punch slowed him. A glancing counter forced a reset. A missed shot left him off balance. Each error fed into the next. By the middle rounds, the gap between them wasn't just physical, it was mental. Joshua looked settled. Jake looked drained. One of the most revealing elements of the fight wasn't a single punch, but Jake's body language. He dropped to a knee more than once, sometimes after questionable contact, sometimes after exchanges that didn't seem fight-ending. Whether those moments were tactical or genuine stopped mattering. The pattern was clear. Jake was buying time, buying air, buying a few extra seconds before having to stand in front of Joshua again. That's not an insult, that's survival. But survival isn't what people tuned in for. They came to see consequences, and those consequences arrived the moment Joshua decided to increase the pressure. Not with chaos, not with reckless aggression, with methodical intent. He stepped in behind combinations instead of single shots. He stopped allowing free movement. He forced exchanges closer to the ropes, where exits disappear. That's where fights change. Not in open space, but where escape isn't an option. Jake tried to lean on theatrics. The tongue out, the smirks, the taunts, the same psychological tricks that had unsettled lesser opponents. But those only work when the other fighter is emotionally engaged. Joshua wasn't. He wasn't angry. He wasn't distracted. He was patient. And patience combined with power is terrifying. Then came the moment everyone remembers. The punch wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was efficient. A straight shot delivered with full mechanics, landing clean enough to alter Jake's expression instantly. His head snapped back. His legs betrayed him. For a brief moment, the entire arena froze. Jake didn't go fully unconscious, which almost made it worse. He was aware enough to feel the danger, but compromised enough to understand how real it was. To his credit, his chin held longer than many expected. Fighters with less durability would have collapsed completely, but toughness isn't dominance. Sometimes it only delays the inevitable. From there on, the fight belonged entirely to Joshua. Jake clutched, he stumbled, he leaned. He did everything except assert himself offensively. What was once framed as a contest began to resemble a hierarchy being enforced.
In my opinion, he won 4 of them. People argue that he at least won 3. No one expected him to last that long. Rolled his ankle, broke his jaw, still fucking fighting, man. Like, that's toughness. You know, most people wouldn't have the balls ever to step in a boxing ring in their life. He stepped in a boxing ring with one of the baddest men on the planet. Who's 40 pounds heavier than him and 6 inches taller. What?
And still, even in defeat, Jake did what Jake has always done. He reframed it. He tweeted. He issued challenges. He turned the loss into momentum for the next chapter. And that's where this conversation gets more complicated than people want it to be. Because while Jake Paul lost decisively, he didn't vanish. He didn't quit. He didn't publicly collapse. And like it or not, that matters. He stepped into a situation most people would never even consider. He faced a level of opposition that exposed his limits with brutal clarity. And he walked out conscious. The audience ultimately got what it wanted. Not a fairy tale, not a viral upset, but the truth. a truth that had been delayed for years. Jake Paul is not an elite heavyweight boxer, but he's also not a fraud cosplaying as one. He's something far more uncomfortable, a serious amateur who pushed his ambition as far as it could go and finally hit the ceiling. And once ceilings are reached, real decisions have to be made. Now that the dust has settled, this fight forces a conversation many people have avoided. Not just about Jake Paul, but about influencer boxing itself, what it is, and more importantly, what it can never be. This wasn't just a loss on a record. It was a boundary being enforced in real time. For a long time, Jake lived in the gray area between entertainment and sport. That gray area is where he thrived. It allowed him to argue that he was still learning, still evolving, still climbing. And to be fair, that wasn't entirely false. He did improve. He did take training seriously. He did put his image on the line every time he stepped into the ring. But boxing, especially heavyweight boxing, does not reward ambition alone. It rewards mastery, and mastery takes decades. Anthony Joshua didn't win this fight because he wanted it more. He didn't win because he promoted better or trained harder in one camp. He won because he has lived inside that world for most of his life. He understands timing, danger, and consequence at a level Jake simply hasn't had the time to reach, and likely never will. That doesn't make Jake a failure. It makes him human. The real question now is what comes next, because this is the moment where many influencer careers fall apart. This is where denial creeps in. Excuses stack up. Credibility evaporates. Jake has two paths forward, and both carry risk. The first path is humility, accepting that elite heavyweight boxing is beyond his reach, and pivoting toward competitive but realistic matchups. Fights that test him without gambling his long-term health. Rematches, crossovers, story-driven bouts where the outcome isn't dictated by physics alone. That path preserves relevance, respect, and longevity. The second path is ego, chasing bigger names, louder call-outs, pretending one brutal loss didn't expose a fundamental gap. That road leads to more damage, a faster decline, and a legacy defined by stubbornness instead of growth. And here's the part people don't like to admit. Jake Paul is smart enough to understand this. The persona he projects is reckless, but behind the scenes he understands branding, narrative, and longevity better than almost anyone in this space. He knows surviving Anthony Joshua doesn't mean he belongs there. It means he escaped with enough credibility to choose carefully. For Joshua, this fight was never about proving himself. His legacy was written long before Jake ever stepped into a boxing gym. This was about restoring perspective, about reminding people what elite heavyweight power actually looks like. And in that sense, Joshua did exactly what he needed to do. He showed discipline, he showed control, and he left without chaos or controversy. This fight will be remembered as a turning point, not because it shocked anyone, but because it clarified everything. The influencer boxing era didn't end here, but it matured. It met resistance. It discovered its limits. And Jake Paul, whether people like him or not, played a role in that evolution. He forced boxing to confront modern fame. He forced critics to define their standards, and ultimately, he forced himself to face something he couldn't outmarket, out-troll, or out-hype. That matters, because history doesn't only remember winners, it remembers moments, and this moment will be replayed, debated, clipped, and referenced for years, not as a joke or a meme, but as the night the experiment finally collided with reality. So whether you watch to laugh, to hate watch, or to seriously analyze the sport, this fight delivered something rare: honesty. No spin, no manufactured controversy, just a clear answer to a question that had been building for years. And now the story continues, just on different terms. So what do you think? Did Jake Paul earn respect by stepping into the ring, or did he push the experiment too far? Where should he go next? And should influencer boxing keep raising the stakes, or slow things down before someone gets seriously hurt?